Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Josefina Chavarria, and your moderator, your host for this conversation. I have included the title in the chat, but I'm not sure if the new participants who have just joined us can see it, so I'm gonna repost it again. We are here to discuss building relationships for peace, the Colombian Truth Commission and Movilizatorio's examples for civil society organizations and civil society as individuals are also engaged in peace process. We're very happy to have each one of you here in our Zoom. We also have a really wonderful list of panelists and discussants who can share their insights and experiences with all of you. But mostly, of course, we want to leave space at the end to really engage in a conversation and listen what your experiences are, what your questions are, and of course, that we have a much more lively exchange. So let me share with you very quickly what the topic of this panel is about. Yes, Maria, thank you. That's what I wanted to say. If you want to start introducing yourselves in the chat, that would be amazing. Also the panelists, why not? So this workshop has come together by realizing something that maybe in peace studies in general seems to be one of those evident truths, and is that civil society participation and engagement in all sorts of peace processes is not only important because of the principle of inclusivity in and of itself, which is an important moral, ethical, and political argument, but also because having civil society engaged actively in the design and in the implementation of peace processes is also a further guarantee of their sustainability, resilience to face crisis, which we should always count on crisis when it comes to peace building. But also it's very important because in the very process of peace building and peace design, peace infrastructures, etc., we can tackle a lot of the demands and the requests from civil society organization towards a more inclusive, more gender equal, more peaceful society. We have set out a few questions that I would also be very happy to copy here in the chat. These are the guiding questions where all of our different panelists will try to share their insights with all of you. How has civil society been actively involved in the creation and consolidation of peace processes? What are the obstacles and opportunities for building sustainable peace through the involvement of civil society? What are some of the efforts of civil society around the peace process in Colombia? Which tools and strategies have CSO created to guarantee their inclusion and in peace building and further face and prevent violence? How can the experience of CSO's peace building processes enrich global peace building experiences? This is important because what we said we wanted to do together was to not only bring you to these two examples of the Truth Commission and Movilizatorio to speak about the context of their creation, but also because we want to reflect together with all of you much more on the legacy of these two different engagements by CSOs, and also the lessons or the best practices that we can draw out from the Colombian context for other contexts. And so the last question that we will be looking at is how can scenarios for participation, engagement, and involvement of civil society be amplified and their impact increase in the current global context? And how has the violence of the armed conflict affected the political participation of civilian populations? And what lessons can be drawn to better integrate them to peace building efforts? And so we have a great collection of panelists who have taken on the challenge of engaging with these questions from their own perspectives. First, Josephine Lechard. Josephine, if you say hi so people know who you are, great. She's a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Inter-American Policy and Research at Tulane University. She holds a PhD in political science and peace studies from the University of Notre Dame, and her research focuses on political violence, migration, and democratic citizenship, examining how violent political orders shape the long-term political behavior of ordinary citizens in Latin America. With us, we also have Matthew Buchanan. Hello, Matt. Hello. He's the manager of external affairs at the Council for Global Equality, a coalition of US-based human rights and LGBTQI+ advocacy organizations promoting a strong US voice for the human rights of LGBTQI+ communities globally. And he is also an alum of the MGA Peace Studies from the Kroc Institute. We have Maria Paula Ramirez. Hello. She has been engaged in dialogue, peace building, and transitional justice for over 18 years, focusing on policy and project design and implementation, dialogue facilitation, and creating strategic networks for political engagement and social ownership. Maria was a permanent advisor to Francisco Rue, the president of the Colombian Truth, Reconciliation, and Non-Repetition Commission, and the director for cooperation and partnerships. She was also a Kroc fellow here with us until last year, so it's really wonderful to have all three of you Kroc related wonderful individuals. And finally, we have Juliana Uribe Villegas. She's a Colombian social entrepreneur, activist, and consultant. She resides at the nexus of social innovation, digital advancement, and international relations. As the CEO and founder of Movilizatorio, she orchestrates impactful initiatives. She has a master's in public administration from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government, and a cum laude master's in international business from the University of Barcelona. So welcome to all of the panelists. And finally, I'm Josefina Chavarria. I'm the director of the Peace Accords Matrix at the University of Notre Dame. And yeah, I'm delighted to be hosting this conversation with all of you here today. So my task is going to be to first provide a very short contextualization of the peace process in Colombia, and then try to keep the time both for myself, but also for our panelists here. So if you in advance, excuse me when I have to say and remind everyone of their time, I would appreciate it. So basically what we have in Colombia is an incredible amount of peace processes, not only basically since 1953. The first demobilization of combatants happened in 1957. We have, I want to say, safe. We also have had a lot of different processes of peace negotiations, especially since the 1990s. So maybe to look back at this third wave of democratization in Latin America, what we see in Colombia is not just a new constitution in 1991, which was also the result of a peace accord, but also the idea that it was only through peaceful means that we were going to be able to really tackle a conflict that, based on the findings of the Colombian Truth Commission, really started around 1958. So over 60 years of war, we had a great amount of different guerrilla organizations with different political ideologies, but one of the most powerful, larger, and deadliest organization was the former guerrilla of the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. There was an important peace attempt that was organized from 1999 until 2001. Unfortunately, it didn't bring the results that it was expected, but it brought very important lessons for what ended up being a successful process of negotiation, again with the FARC guerrillas, but almost 15 years later, from 2012 until 2016. This process that was carried out mostly in Havana, Cuba, then had representatives from the Colombian government, representatives from the FARC-EP guerrilla. There were no mediation, and there were some strict rules that are maybe interesting for those who work on peace studies design around the world, the idea that all the different, that the agenda, there was a framework agenda with 6 points at the beginning, it wouldn't be expanded, and the partial agreements that were being reached in a consecutive way at the table would not be implemented as they were being agreed, but only that the largest comprehensive peace accord would be implemented after it was finished. When we look at the Colombian experience in a comparative perspective, we find quite important innovations, three particular intersectional approaches, from a territorial approach, which is the way that we call really this idea of grassroots bottom-up approaches to peace building in Colombia, an ethnic and a gender approach. So recognizing that both ethnic communities, but also women and diverse gender populations suffered in a disproportionate way the conflict. And this was especially recognized in Chapter 5 of the Peace Accord, which is the chapter that deals with a hybrid mechanism of transitional justice. So this is a very short contextualization, and maybe with this, I would like to give the word to Juliana so that she tells us a little bit more about maybe what were the opportunities that you found precisely within this context for social organizations in the process of in the context of the peace process, and how did this influence the creation of Movilizatorio?
Well, thank you, and good afternoon or morning for everyone. I would like to start highlighting that the peace negotiations between the government and the FARC happened for several years, and most of them happened in Cuba. And from time to time, as civil society, we would switch on the TV and listen to the press release about how the negotiations were advancing. And in some way, we felt like the future of our country was being decided, but it was decided between this team of negotiators. And as civil society, we didn't know how we could participate, what were the entry points in which we could provide insights into the negotiations. Later on, the negotiations started opening a little bit more, and that's when we saw a huge opportunity to mobilize citizens in both the territories that had suffered the most out of the conflict, but also in the urban areas, to start participating in these spaces and sending questions, but also proposals and how we could achieve the agreement and build peace. And this was a huge opportunity because this process was happening at the wake up also of the use of the internet, at the use of the social media. And one of the big questions but also opportunities that we saw is how can we learn how these technologies could be part of the peace building process and of the agreement process. And a big part of the theory behind this is that if civil society is not early on and actively and massively engaged in the peace process, it is harder for civil society to then be able to sustain peace or to participate in peace decisions in an informed way, as the calling that we had in 2016 in October when we were called to vote on the referendum on the final agreement. So we were born exactly in the midst of all of this happening in 2016, and with a humble approach to this, we said, okay, let's build a lab in a way in which we can experiment, test, and learn different methodologies and different approaches to learning peace, experimenting with the use of technology, but definitely with the aim of massively engaging people at the territories and in the urban areas in this conversation. So I leave it there for now. I think this is a good part of the story to start. And I pass it to you, Josefina, for follow-up questions or for our panelists.
Thank you so much, Juliana. I mean, I think that when we hear how Movilizatorio was created and all the different engagements you have, it's really an amazing the development for other civil society organizations around the world. What we want to do now is, now that you've heard a little bit about the context and how Movilizatorio was created, look at these particular experiences and expertise of the panelists and explore the different, and as you heard, very creative ways in which civil society has been involved in this peace process. So I would like to start by inviting first Maria Paula Prada. Maria, can you, when we want to start talking about the legacy strategy of the Truth Commission, and especially also that focus on gender and innovative inclusion of LGBTQI. And so this, as I was saying, this is part of the legacy strategy of the Colombian Truth Commission. And I was wondering if you maybe can share with our friends and colleagues here in the conversation, how did the Truth Commission work with civil society in creating those alliances?
Thanks, Josefina and Juliana, and it's a pleasure to be here. We have a very limited time, so in order to continue this conversation and these thoughts that have been already presented by Josefina and Juliana, I would like to share with the audience that my perspective is going to be the perspective of a public officer working for an institution that is part of a system of transitional justice that resulted from the peace agreement. So it's related to the implementation of the peace agreement. And what maybe we didn't say until now is that once the peace agreement was signed, the president of Colombia those days, and also the FARC that was negotiating the conflict, they agreed on making a referendum in Colombia in order to seek that society will all understand what was going on and will support the peace agreement. And unfortunately, due to different causes, and we don't have the time to speak about it, the referendum was lost. But then the Congress ratified the agreement, and that's why we have a constitutional agreement nowadays in Colombia. But due to the fact that it was lost, the implementation of the peace agreement began with a lack of legitimacy, which is very important in order to anchor and to begin its implementation. And the Truth Commission, where I was working, was one of the first institutions that was created and that needed to develop its mandate after the signature of the peace agreement. So that's a key issue to keep in mind, lack of legitimacy in the public sphere and public narrative in Colombia. And the other element I would like to share with you is that the Truth Commission was created and designed with a lot of participation of civil society during the peace negotiations. And so a lot of movements in Colombia from civil society, from women, from LGBTI communities, from ethnic people, and different types of organizations and populations sent their inputs and suggestions in order to create the mandate of this Truth Commission. So that's another element very important to have in mind. Besides that, which was like the context of the moment, the particular context of the moment in Colombia, for those of you that are not aware or don't know this, Colombia has had an armed conflict, very diverse types of violence in it, and a diversity of armed groups, which some of them are still struggling today. But it has been an armed conflict for over 60 years. So you have to imagine that the role of a Truth Commission is to speak about what happened, how it happened. But we needed to look for 60 years of armed confrontation. We had 3 years in order to do that. And our mandate was not only to look to the past, but also to enhance or strengthen peaceful coexistence in the present while we were doing our mandate, and to define some recommendations for non-repetition in the future. So it was a mandate covering the past, the present, and the future. We had 3 years. We had COVID in the middle. And so all of these issues that I have just mentioned are the reasons why we, from the beginning, understood that as a state institution that had only 3 years to work on these, we had limitations, and we couldn't afford to work on the past, on the present, and on the future only as an institution and as a transitional institution. We were created as a public institution during those 3 years, and we disappeared also as a public institution after 3.5 years. So we clearly understood, if we were the result of the social mobilization in Colombia, if we had to cover 60 years of armed confrontation, but also if we were seeking to advance towards non-repetition, we needed to hold our hands with all of the other actors, not only civil society, but most of it civil society, but also with other institutions at territorial level and national level, with international allies, in order to be capable of developing our mandate. Finally, we had 6 months additionally to our initial period because of COVID. And that's why we developed what we call a legacy strategy. That was from midterm, when we were at almost like 1.5 or 2 years after we began the mandate. We were thinking already on how to work on sustainability and ownership of the results. And I would only say for the moment that thinking about sustainability and ownership was not something that came into our heads like just as a phasing out strategy, but the way how the Truth Commission developed its mandate from the beginning, which was very participatory, allowed us to work on a strategy that afterwards was taken or overtaken by a diversity of allies in Colombia. Further, in my next turn, I will show you some of this information where you can just go deeper into it. Thanks, Josefina. And then Matthew will approach this more concrete with some examples from the LGBTQI community.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, you mentioned two important aspects that that we haven't touched upon, and maybe we can do it also in the Q&A, and is that while the mandate of the Truth Commission ended, also part of the sustainability strategy is to have a follow-up committee for the implementation of the recommendations. So I think that's also one of those best practices from Colombia that we're very proud of, and that is something that can be also an inspiration for civil society efforts around the world. Matt, your research on Colombia's peace has focused on its pioneering inclusion of LGBTQI. So we've heard a lot about innovations, but this is especially important for us to highlight today. What can international peace practitioners learn from Colombia's LGBTQI plus inclusive peace? And what was the role that civil society played in these efforts?
Thank you, Josefina. Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew. And yes, and so Colombia's 2016 Peace Accord did set this global precedent by integrating a gender perspective into its peace process. And it's super notable because it included lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people within this gender approach. And this was all a result of including women and LGBTQ groups during the peace negotiations and during the actual implementation of the accord. And so this has all positioned Colombia as a leader in inclusive peace building. And when we think about this at the global level, this approach is critical because LGBTQ individuals continue to face high levels of discrimination, violence, and even criminalization. In over 60 countries, same-sex relationships are still illegal. And furthermore, only about 18 countries have rights-based legal frameworks that allow for gender recognition based on gender identity. And so the bleak reality is that LGBTQ people are subjected to harassment, physical violence, and state-sanctioned punishment simply for being who they are. And these challenges are further exacerbated in armed conflict, where societal prejudices are often exploited by armed actors, which only deepens the vulnerabilities and dangers for these communities. And so that's what makes Colombia's approach to addressing conflict-related violence against LGBTQ individuals so significant. The Colombian Truth Commission made this groundbreaking effort to include LGBTQ victims in its investigations And this all culminated in dedicating an entire chapter to LGBTQ communities and its landmark report. And so my research has focused on how the Truth Commission's Gender Working Group worked to implement this inclusive gender approach, particularly through collaboration with LGBTQ civil society organizations. And this collaboration is a model for global peace building initiatives and demonstrates the essential role that civil society plays in ensuring a truly inclusive peace. And so this gender working group was established by legal mandate after the ratification of the 2016 Peace Accord. And it was a specialized unit tasked with developing methodologies that would capture the unique experiences of women and LGBTQ communities during the conflict. Civil society was instrumental in this process. They created a technical assistance table that brought together women's and LGBT organizations to actively contribute to the Commission's work. So you had organizations in Colombia like Caribe Afirmativo, Colombia Diversa, and local platforms who all provided grassroots insights, data, and direct engagement capabilities with victims and survivors, which were indispensable for the Commission's success. So for example, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression were integrated into interview record forms, making the Truth Commission the first state-based entity in Colombia to systematically gather such disaggregated data on LGBTQ communities. And additionally, the Commission received 22 reports from LGBTQ civil society organizations about the specific experiences that these communities had throughout Colombia's armed conflict. And one of the most important contributions from the Gender Working Group was the adoption of what is called a prejudice-based violence framework. Essentially, this framework expanded the concept of gender-based violence to include violence targeting LGBTQ individuals based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. What this does is it helps challenge these gendered hierarchies of heteronormativity and cisnormativity. So essentially these widespread expectations that hold heterosexuality as the only normal sexuality, and that a person's gender identity always corresponds with their sex assigned at birth. And so this broader understanding of gender-based violence showed that violence against LGBTQ people in Colombia's conflict wasn't random. It was a calculated strategy used by armed conflicts, guerrillas, paramilitary groups, state security forces to exploit these societal prejudices and deepen social control over communities. And recognizing this kind of violence as gender-based sets a crucial precedent for transitional justice efforts worldwide, including in multilateral efforts on gender and peace building, like the United Nations Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. And so the key takeaway from Colombia's experience is that LGBTQ civil society organizations must be active participants at every stage of peace initiatives, from negotiations to implementation. Their insights ensure that inclusive policies are not just these theories, but that they're practical and that they're effective and that they make true changes to the lived experiences of people who are most disproportionately impacted by armed conflict violence. And so Colombian LGBTQ civil society has shown us that this work is possible and it's essential, and that queer people must live boldly in the face of adversity, embrace their identities, and be able to push forward and build peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Matt, thank you for your very well-timed 5 minutes of intervention. We all appreciate how each one of you is making an effort to summarize this great and vast ocean of knowledge and experiences. And with this, maybe our audience has already noticed that we keep talking about the ways in which civil society really pushed itself into the peace process and the changes that it created, both in the result in terms of the provisions that were included in the peace accord or in the very mandate of the Truth Commission, but also how the process was really innovative, and it required a long persistence and durée. I want to precisely speak a little bit more about these new methodologies that were developed, for example, by Movilizatorio when it came to questions of crisis transformation. Maybe, Juliana, you want to share with us some more of those civil society methodologies.
Sure. Let me share also some slides with you all about this. Great. So the first thing of the model that we build to support like the peace building in Colombia is believing in the power of people to drive this change. One of the important things that happened is that when the peace agreement was passed through Congress, there was very little time out of the government of President Juan Manuel Santos. And about like a year and a half later, we were voting a new president that had different policies. So sustaining the peace process, sustaining the peace agreement, and also sustaining